Hello everyone, and welcome to the Revolutionary Animal Advocacy Forum. I'm Chip. I'm an animal rights advocate. I usually do YouTube, I don't want to call them challenges. I just go on the street, I do outreach, I ask people, why aren't you vegan? Then I scold them about not being vegan. So, yeah, well, I know you probably were expecting like a tall, handsome Dutch guy, but he's unfortunately sick because he's vegan, right? Yeah, but he's one of the founders. Lodewijk is one of the founders, and so is Torben over here. And they are responsible for everything you see here. It's excellent organized. This is the second time, by the way. I don't know, how many of you have been here the first time we did this? I don't think it was called RAAF the first time, but there was a first time. Has anybody been for the first one? Hands up who has been for the first one. Yay, the originals. You will get the card that you have been in the original ones. You'll remember it because this event is going to go big at some point. So, okay. So I'm just going to be looking at my phone because I only found out that I will be speaking for you. Well, I'll be introducing the speakers today and stuff because Lodewijk was sick. He really tried to make it work. So I'm just going to make sure that I say everything that you need to hear. So first and foremost, you do have tea, coffee, snacks everywhere around you. Feel comfortable going, grabbing, washing, cleaning, disposing, whatever you want to do, just go ahead and do it, right? Like they're all put out for everybody to have. That's one. So feel free to grab any of those. We do have a program. I believe you have seen. Oh, it's not there. So I believe you have seen. We have some speakers. Another speaker, Nicole is ill. So, yeah, sadly, he also won't be speaking today, so we only have 4 speakers. There will be a break in the middle where you can use the bathroom and such, or whatever, speak to each other, you know, things. Yeah, in total, it might be around 2 hours, so, I don't know, 1 hour for some speakers, then a break, and then 1 hour. I'm only telling you kind of what to expect. We're not going to be extremely strict on time, right? Or we are going to be very strict on time, okay? Yeah. The speeches are mostly going to be in English. If you're not comfortable, if you want to ask questions and you're not comfortable asking in English, you can ask in Dutch. Somebody will translate, and but please formulate the questions concise so that we don't waste too much time with the question. You can add a little bit of backstory if you want, but not too long, I guess. Most of it is going to be recorded. I mean, there's no reason why you would be in front of it. But if you have any issue, just let us know. But be aware that it's probably going to be recorded. Yeah, and that's it. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Torben. He is, as I said, one of the co-founders. I actually saw Torben for the first time during a fur protest. He wasn't just yelling out words, you know, stop fur or what do we want, animal liberation. I don't know. I'm not very good at yelling out words. But he was like, he just took the megaphone and started coming up with this amazing speech without like all of the sudden. I'm just sitting there looking at him like, did he write this down? What's going on? No, he's an amazing animal rights advocate. So, and yeah, let's give it up for Torben. He's going to prepare this.
Thank you, Chip, for the great introduction.
Sure.
Thank you for the great introduction. As he said, my name is Torben. I've been an animal rights advocate for 4.5 years now. I've explored various forms and types of activism. And I've reached a certain point today where I feel like there's more of a need to reflect, to I think that's the mic in the back actually. I'll just do it without mic. I think you can all hear me. So, out of this desire to reflect, to discuss, and to strategize, I came up with this idea to co-found RAAF. And in this opening speech, I would like to go into detail a bit more about what's the idea behind this event, to sort of set the right tone for tonight, but also for all of the upcoming RAAFs, because this is going to be a seasonally recurring event, so every 3 months. The other event Chip mentioned was the FAM, which is something that Lodewijk organized, which is similar, but we've sort of twisted the concept. So this is officially the first RAAF event. But first and foremost, and also on behalf of Lodewijk, who couldn't make it today, I would like to welcome all of you tonight. Thank you for being here. It's quite exciting to see all of you, especially because the fact that you are all here, I think, shows that you're dedicated to helping animals, and that you, just like myself, like the person that's sitting to the left of you, like the person that's sitting to the right of you, probably won't give up until you have somehow made this world a better place for animals. Or rather, until we have done so collectively. And some of you might say that that sounds a bit exaggerated. Like, you could say, well, as we know, people are also animals, so aren't we just a bunch of 50 monkeys sitting in a random neighborhood center? Like, is this really how a revolution starts? And frankly, I think it might be. And I would like to remind you of this quote, which goes as follows: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Well, I think we are committed because we're here on our free Friday night. We're sitting here instead of partying or sitting on the couch watching Netflix or whatever else we're into. So I'm quite optimistic about that. And regarding thoughtful, well, that's exactly why we're here tonight. We're here to continue informing ourselves, to continue discussing, and above all, to continue strategizing. And what I also like is that this is just such a diverse bunch of people in front of me. But what unites us is that we care about animals. We know that even in a world with wars, with democracies being undermined, we still hear those cries of those animals asking for help. However, somewhat paradoxically, today and tonight, we'll probably be talking mostly about people, right? Because it's us that need to make a change, and it's the society in which we find ourselves, in which we need to make it happen. And that's what we're here to discuss. And discussing also means being critical. Being critical of society, obviously, I don't need to explain that, but also reflecting critically on ourselves. And that also means that in this event, we want to foster a spirit of discussion. So, if you disagree with anything I said, I would see it as a gift if you gave me constructive feedback. Because if you have an idea that could help us all forward, that's something we need to hear. And that's what we're here to share with each other. By the way, I forgot that. Let's see. Yeah, that's me. The proof that I'm actually not just talking about it, but also doing it in practice. I want to give sort of a warming up in the remainder of this opening speech. Let's see. About what it means to strategize and to think about strategy based on your own experience. So this is not like a scientific scheme, but it is definitely informed by things I've read, and of which some things are scientific. I think that this type of change is something that resonates with a lot of us. It's probably what we have all experienced on an individual level. The sense of maybe this, you could call it awakening, but this feeling of being motivated and having this rational insight or this moral insight about what we do to animals and how it is so wrong. And it's also something that's reflected a lot in our advocacy, I think. For example, it's where I started when I started doing a lot of outreach on the street. It was about planting the seeds in people's head, one by one, to make them change. I think that can be very powerful. I think if this wouldn't happen, we wouldn't have a movement, because all of us have gone through this process. But on a more critical note, I also think that it is something that makes us sort of unique. Because for many people, just changing this way seems to be hard. There seems to be a sort of ceiling reached, considering, for example, the amount of people who are going vegan. So I think that we can complement our little pseudo-scientific scheme with some more types of change, just to structure our thoughts. I think another type of change could be change on a more social level, so on the level of networks, social networks, or communities, or if we scale it up a little bit, norms and the culture. And then there's also institutional change, where we really focus on the rules, the policies and the procedures, and how we can specifically target those. And the last speaker tonight, Tim, I think will also go into that. At the same time, I think that those pursuing this institutional change also need to recognize and be aware that their ability to change rules and policies and procedures is based on change in a more social way. And for example, pressure campaigning and political lobbying is a very powerful tactic, but also something that could be combined with creating this sort of social change at the same time, if we do so strategically. And this social dimension, I think, is something that, as I said, is crucial to change in society. But why? Well, because people are social beings. So they might obey the rules, but if the norms are against the rules, they might resist. And they might follow their own rationality, their own morality, and maybe realize that a vegan world would be better. But if the people around them, in their networks, in the culture they live in, say otherwise, tell them otherwise, you need to be quite unique to stick to your own belief in that sense. So even though we might be special in some ways, I think we are also social beings like them, which is why for us as advocates, it's necessary to not only focus on fostering that change of all of those types, but also consider ourselves as beings that need a community, which brings me to another purpose of RAAF, because we're here also to feel this sense of community, to feel this sense of shared purpose, and to support each other as such. So I'll wrap up. I think the main takeaway that I would like to convey to you is that as advocates, it's good to move beyond our comfort zone, and that can be on various levels. So it can be about trying out new forms of advocacy, of animal rights advocacy that are out there. It can also be about seeking inspiration from advocacy abroad and seeing what experiments are happening there. But it can also be about going back to the past. Because even when considering animals, there have been great changes, for example, when it comes to the moral status of whales, which has happened in the 70s. Well, why don't we study that? And why don't we actually study other social movements more? Because when we look at successful social movements in the past, they have studied other movements as well and drawn lessons from that. And I feel like animal rights advocates can broaden their focus in that sense. And I realize I've forgotten about another bubble I put into the slide, which is technological change, which is also something where we can find advantage. Think, for example, about cultured meat. And if you're really into this, if you're this technical specialist, then please go ahead and make those changes happen. But I think that whether those technologies will break through crucially depends on the other types of change, particularly the norms about it, and particularly also the institutional rules and policies and procedures. Because we know that there are already countries in this world where the prospect of cultured meat is banned already, and that's a problem. I've been thinking a lot about social movement strategy in the past years, and if you're interested to dive into this, these are some interesting links. You will also receive an email at the end with those links, so don't worry about making pictures or anything. And that's it.
So if anybody has some questions right now for Torben, I actually have a question for you myself.
Go ahead.
So what would you recommend for somebody who has not done any animal rights advocacy ever? They're maybe vegan, but they really want to speak out or do something. Maybe they're a bit nervous. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of going out of their comfort zone. What would you recommend they do?
To sign up for the next RAAF. Because this is a place where we hope that people will feel welcome to become adopted in our family. And also to learn about many forms of activism. Because, as you said, people might be nervous or uncertain about what suits them, what fits them. And actually, that's very nice that you asked that question, because I forgot to say that that's also a purpose of RAAF, of course, to learn about things that you might never have heard about before. And after that, I mean, there are many things. For me, personally, it started with outreach on the street. And I think I've learned a lot from that. I've learned to talk to people and to engage in those conversations, which is very much applicable to, I think, creating change on the other levels. You could take those lessons from people, from speaking to people, and apply them when you go to lobby to some politician or policymaker, or when you're on the radio, if you get the opportunity to change the culture and the norms.
Nice, nice. Is there any method? I'm sorry, I keep asking questions. Does anybody else have other questions? I could ask questions all day long. Please go ahead.
How did you start doing activism? So what's your story behind it?
My motivation, or is that the question?
No, what's your story?
No, your story behind since you became vegan to start doing activism.
I took a lot of inspiration on the internet from videos of activists. For example, Joey Carpstrong. Some people might have heard of him. Yeah. I think that's absolutely crucial. Like, this is what he does, is sort of creating this change on the individual level with a message that is not just about changing your diet or your lifestyle, but about becoming active and sort of taking it further. We need to invest a lot in creating these opportunities, like these YouTube channels that can inspire many people. And that's how I started doing street outreach.
So not really long ago.
4.5 years ago.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
Nice and for sharing.
And after that I've also done civil disobedience. I've done pressure campaigning, for example, against fur shops, as you mentioned. Currently I'm involved with plant-based universities, and they're also represented here tonight, which I think is a great example of a very effective campaign, because it's about making universities' canteens plant-based, as the name says. And it really combines creating sort of shifting norms at the campus and having a specific institutional demand, which is brilliant.
Does anybody have other questions? Go on.
You named a lot of examples of change and like concrete examples how it looks like, but what are some examples of the social bubble? Because you gave examples of all the others, but you have examples of the social bubble. What do you mean with types of change?
I think the social bubble is the trickiest because it is very tangible. I think that if we think about how people think about animals now compared to a few decades ago and how open they are to the idea of, for example, plant-based diets, a lot has changed, more than is reflected on what they do on an individual level. So I think social change is something that's mostly reflected in individual and also institutional change, but it's hard to pinpoint. However, what I could give as an example is that in the 70s, environmental groups have really put out a lot of messaging against whaling. They have released, for example, some songs of the humpback whale, which sort of push this entire narrative that whales are somehow special. And this is why their moral status and also their legal protection has really become high in Western countries. Although there's a critical note to it, namely that went along with a lot of bashing of other countries and other cultures where whaling was still accepted, which led to backlash also. But I think that could be an example.
And there was one more question over there.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about how you learn from other social movements? Because I think, we can look at historical movements and we can see that certain movements have succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that every single strategy within that movement was successful, or even if it was successful, optimized. So how do you sort of pick that apart when you look at it?
That's a brilliant question, because actually on a sort of meta level, something we learn from past social movement is exactly the fact that they're engaging in a lot of trial and error. We see from the past that there have been campaigns where they have constantly adapted their own strategy. And I think that in itself is something that we can learn from, because there are some animal rights groups that sort of get stuck in their groove and which sort of stick to a certain protocol or a way of doing that's not so flexible anymore and not so dynamic and doesn't play into what happens. I think a lot of general lessons can be drawn from the past. I think one tradition that's especially rich, for example, is nonviolent direct action, which is something that has, for example, been pioneered by Gandhi in India, which the civil rights movement in America then draw inspiration from, and which is now being sort of adopted but also adapted by the climate movement. And I think it could work for the animal rights movement as well. And Animal Rebellion, for example, and Animal Rising in the UK have pioneered this approach. And unfortunately, they're not so active anymore with this method, but it could work, especially, I think, with types of animal abuse that are somewhat controversial already, tying back to the sort of the social norms. So, for example, horse racing. There have been actions where people jumped onto the where the horses raced to block the entire event. And I think the timing of that was perfect because it's already controversial, and in that way you can start this entire media debate around it, which you can win because we're right and they're wrong.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? One question over there.
So I'm curious to tie in a bit more about analyzing other social movements. How would you determine which movements even qualify to actually analyze? Because I noticed that quite often people only look at movements that they themselves support. Well, I think maybe the backlash itself might also be a movement, you know? So some people might think of pro-life as a movement, while others think of pro-choice as a movement. Do you, yeah.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from movements even though we don't agree with them. I think that what we see today is that there is a tremendously successful anti-LGBT movement around the globe. And there's a lot of lessons to learn from that, because they, by the way, they have held conferences like this. And there are undercover videos of those conferences which start by them saying, well, we have those strategies, please don't record this, because this is all secret. Because what we're going to do is we're going to infiltrate the UN, we're going to those other African countries where we can convince them to adopt horrific laws against gay people, for example. And then pretend as if we are not connected to that at all. Which is a brilliant strategy, and we can see how we can adopt it as an animal rights movement.
But I think we're on the right side anyway, right?
Yeah.
We have logical consistency. Well, I think like what I tell people who want to go into activism, if you're nervous, don't be nervous. You have logic, you have morals, you have everything on your side. They've got nothing, no way. Like nobody has a good argument against veganism. They always just pinpoint around the same idea. So don't be nervous about it. You just go out there and do it. And that's, I think, a big deal out of our movement, where I don't think there's anything negative to say about veganism. It's impossible to say anything negative because it is essentially logical to me. So
exactly, we can be confident. And at the same time, understand that people are maybe 10% rational and 90% intuitive and social. So that's why I complemented the individual bubble with the other, the social and the institutional. Yeah, you need.
We're going to take one more question. Let's go.
Can you talk a little bit more about how individual change can be really demotivating if the social norm is really, anti-vegan, and also the institutional norms are also anti-vegan, because human beings are social animals, and yes, maybe they want to change, but for example, if they go to a cafeteria or something, the institution there is non-vegan. So how can we jump to that level of, okay, as an individual, I am living a vegan life, but I'm also really, a lot of people are depressed about it. So how can they jump that gap?
So that's a lot to respond to. When it comes to the sort of the depressed and the mental health aspect, we have a great third speaker about this. So definitely stick around for that. But for the rest, I think you're making a good point. Sort of the starting point is that all of those types of change are pointed against you. Meat eating, abusing animals is the norm. As such, it is hard in the social context. And as such, the rules favor those industries. They get subsidized instead of those plant-based options. And they will fight for themselves to become subsidized and for oat milk to become, to get a surcharge and the taxation. So where does it start? I think it started with a few rebellious individuals. But from that point on, I think that even though sort of the odds are against us, it is good to start working on those other levels. And I think a lot of efforts have gone into, for example, on the institutional level, getting something done. Welfare standards, for example. On the social level, getting something done, which could be building a community, which might be sort of on the social niche, but then still create a sort of dense network of individuals who care about this, which could then snowball into mainstream society, slowly but surely.